So today we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. And first of all, remember, we talked about this before, a quadratic equation is an equation in this form: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, if we have an equation in this form, we can take the a, the b, and the c, just the numbers, no x's, and we can put them into this formula here, and we can solve for x. So the formula is, this is the whole numerator, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is a really easy way to solve quadratic equations. The biggest issue is math errors. Math errors seem to be the biggest issue. So if we go to the bottom of the page, I have an example, and it's already worked out here for you. So it says, solve the quadratic equation using the quadratic formula, round to the nearest hundredth. That means 2 decimal places. So here's my equation, and notice it has to be everything on one side and the other side is 0. So I'm going to write down my a, my b, and my c so I don't mix them up. So my a is 3, my b is 1, and my c is -1. You have to make sure to take the signs with the number. So c is -1. And now that I've listed a, b, and c, I'm going to put them into the quadratic formula. So here is that quadratic formula. First of all, I start with negative b. b is 1, so I have -1. Here's my plus or minus, because this is how I'm going to get 2 solutions out of this. Next thing I have is b squared. B squared is always going to be positive, because whether b is positive or negative, once you square it, you're going to get a positive. So 1 squared is 1. Minus 4 times a times c. So I've got 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is -1. Now in this case, this is going to be minus -12, which is the same as plus 12 in my next step. My denominator is 2a, so 2 times 3, which is a. So next, I'm just going to start simplifying this. I've got -1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus -12 is plus 12 over 6. And the 1 plus 12 simplifies to 13. This is simplest radical form. The next thing that you're going to want to do is simplify this by putting it into your calculator and getting the decimal representations. So if you get your calculator out and put these 2 values in, -1 plus the square root of 13 over 6, you get 0.43. If you put in -1 minus the square root of 13 all over 6, you get -0.77. All right? Let's try another one. All right, so we've got 5x squared plus 4x minus 2 equals 0. So first of all, I've got everything on one side and 0 on the other side, and I'm going to define a, b, and c. So a is 5, b is 4, c is -2. And remember, here's my formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And yes, you will need to memorize this. So next, negative b is going to be -4. Next, I have the square root of b squared. B squared is 4 squared, which is 16. So 16 minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is -2. And this is all over 2 times a, which is 5. All right, so I've got some math here to do. So my next step, I've got -4 plus or minus the square root of 16, and this is minus a negative, so plus a positive. 4 times 5 is 20, times 2 is 40. All over 10. So this is going to give me -4 plus or minus the square root of 56 all over 10. Now I do need to simplify the square root of 56, and I think it divides by 4. It does. So this is the square root of 4 times the square root of 14. So when I simplify this, I get -4 plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 14 all over 10. Now here's what you notice. This, and this all divide by 2. So from your numerator, you can factor out a 2, and that'll give you -2 plus or minus the square root of 14 all over 10. And now you can cancel. The 2 goes into 10 5 times. And so my simplest radical form is -2 plus or minus the square root of 14 all over 5. Now, I've got to put this in my calculator twice to get my decimal answer. So I've got -2 plus the square root of 14. I'm going to click enter or equals, and then divided by 5. And that's going to give me 0.35. And I can do this again with minus, and I've got -2 minus the square root of 14 equals, and then divided by 5, and I get -1.15. So this is pretty easy. The biggest difficulty is remembering the formula and not messing up the math. So let's do the next one. And the first thing that we're going to have to do is we have to have 0 on one side. So subtract 7 on both sides. And so you've got 3x squared minus 6x minus 7 equals 0. All right, now your A is 3, B is -6, and C is -7. So we're going to start out with our formula again, and we start with -b. Well, b is -6. The negative of -6, 2 negatives give you a positive, so you're starting with +6. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. When you square -6, -6 times itself gives you +36. Minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is -7. All over 2 times a, which is 3. Now I just need to do some math to simplify this. So this equals 6 plus or minus, I've got the square root of 36. This is going to be minus a negative, so plus a positive. I've got 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 7 is 84. And this is divided by 6. So now I need to add 36 and 84. So 6 plus or minus the square root of 120. All divides by 6. Now I need to simplify the square root of 20, so I need to think of a perfect square that goes into 120. So I'm going to use my calculator and play around a little bit, and 4 does. So this is the square root of 4 times the square root of 30. So this equals 6 plus or minus, the square root of 4 is 2, square roots of 30, which does not simplify, over 6. Now, to get this in simplest radical form, notice that this, and this all divide by 2. So let's factor a 2 out from our numerator. And that'll give us in parentheses 3 plus or minus the square root of 30. Now we can cancel. 2 goes into itself once and into 6 3 times. So our simplest radical form answer is 3 plus or minus the square root of 30 all over 3. And now we just need to put this in our calculator and get our decimal answers. So again, 3 plus the square root of 30, hit the equals button, then divide by 3. And one of my answers is 2.83. Now let's do minus 3 minus the square root of 30, enter, divide by 3 equals, and I get negative 0.83. All right, let's go to the next example. Now remember, here's what I need to do. I need to get this into my standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So go ahead and distribute, and we get 6x squared plus 12x equals negative 5. Move that 5 to the other side. So add 5 to both sides because you need to have 0 on one side for this to work. And you get 6x squared plus 12x plus 5 equals 0. Now I know that A is 6, B is 12, C is 5. So let's go ahead and we'll go through this particular example. All right, so start out with negative B. That will give us negative 12 plus or minus the square root of B squared. So 12 squared, which is 144, minus 4 times A, which is 6, times C, which is 5. All over 2 times A, so 2 times 6. We need to get our calculator out here, so we've got negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 144 minus. Now I've got 4 times 6 times 5, and that equals 120. All over 12. So now we just need to do our subtraction. We have negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 144 minus 120 is 24 all over 12. And we need to simplify the square root of 24. And what goes into 24 is 4. So this is the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. So when I go to simplify, I've got negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 6 all over 12. And notice, 1, 2, 3 things all divide by 2. So factor out a GCF of 2. And then parentheses, that gives me negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6. Divide that by 12. Now I can cancel. 2 goes into itself once and into 12 6 times. So my simplest radical form answer is negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 all over 6. And I just need to put this into my calculator to figure out the decimal solutions. So negative 6 plus the square root of 6, then hit equals, then divided by 6. This is going to give me negative 0.59. All right, let's do minus. So negative 6 minus the square root, oh, oops, I put in a plus, hang on, back up. minus the square root of 6 equals, and then divided by 6. And this gives me negative 1.41. All right, very last example at the bottom of the page. All right, something interesting is going to happen with this particular example as we go through it. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and start. Let's define, we've got 0 on one side, so A, B, and C. So A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is 10. So let's go ahead and put this in our formula. We start with negative B. Well, B is negative 6. The negative of that, negative, gives you a positive. So it's positive 6 plus or minus the square root of B squared is negative 6 times itself, which gives us 36, minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 10, divided by 2 times A, which is 1. So let's go ahead and do this math. And we get 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 40. And this is over 2. Let's do that subtraction. So we get 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 40 is negative 4. And notice we've got the square root of a negative number. This is going to be an imaginary number solution. All right, so now divided by 2, and let's simplify. So 6 plus or minus, remember, square root of negative 4 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4. The square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of 4 is 2, so plus or minus 2I, all over 2. Notice, 1, 2, 3 things, all divide by 2. Factor out 2 is the greatest common factor, and you get 3 plus or minus I in parentheses, all over 2. Cancel those 2's. And our final answer is 3 plus or minus I. Now, when you have an imaginary number solution, you can't put this in decimal form. So you can just give the simplest radical form answer, which is this.